Hello and welcome to our weekly webcast with the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Today is December 1st, 2022. And as we've been reporting recently, the danger of stumbling or bumbling into a nuclear war continues to grow with completely uncontrolled statements coming from various NATO officials, US officials. The British are pushing. So we're going to start with a review of that because this is generally not being covered in an adequate way for Western audiences. So Helga, why don't you mentioned the statement from Ryabokov earlier. The Russians are taking the situation very seriously, aren't they?
Well, I think his deputy foreign minister Ryabokov said that he is quite concerned about the casualty, how people are talking about nuclear war, limited nuclear war in Europe, and that this is very dangerous. And that's exactly what I emphasized in recent speeches in conferences. That if you start to think that it's natural to use a nuclear weapon, then you are really going through the barrier. And we have several videos on our websites, and you should please look for them, where we show very clearly what happens in a nuclear war. It is the end of civilization, and that's what these people are playing with. So the people are not like that. It's the governments, it's the NATO governments, it's the US, the British, the German government, and we come to that in a second, but it's not the people. I mean, we have from many discussions, in Europe, in Germany, especially there, because I think there the awareness of what war is higher than it is in the United States. People are getting quite desperate because they see how this more weapons to Ukraine, which was mentioned again at the recent NATO Foreign Minister meeting, or the idea that there is no limit to support of Ukraine, whatever that means. General Kuyat basically said that if you say that, you are transferring part of your state power to the Ukrainian government, because if it's up to them to decide when it's enough. This is getting in a very dangerous trajectory. Then naturally these unspeakable statements by Ursula von der Leyen that the EU will confiscate the Russian assets the European banks have somehow a hold of, which was answered very sharply by Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry. She said that they will answer. It's not yet clear how, but if this happens, basically they will take similar measures. They could confiscate property of European firms. And this is a spiral of escalation, which is really absolutely against the interest of Europe. And I can only say I just a little while ago watched another video by Scott Ritter with some platform called Counterpole. And he really, and I can only suggest to all of you that you should watch this, because he is challenging the German population now for the second time or the third time in a very direct way, where he says, well, what is this government? Have they been complicit in the sabotage of the Minsk process? Germany and France had the responsibility of making sure that the Minsk Accord would be implemented. And obviously, they didn't do anything for several years. And in the meantime, former President Poroshenko from Ukraine has said very openly that they only pretended to go along with the Minsk, which never was really going anywhere, in order to have four and a half more years of time to train the Ukrainian troops up to the NATO standard. So Scott Ritter, in a very polemical way, says, what is wrong with this German government? Did they know about it? Did they knew that the whole Minsk thing was a sham to prepare the Ukrainian troops for the fight against Russia? Or, they didn't know, are they then part of NATO? And then he basically says, what is unfortunately quite obvious, that this German government is just stumbling along, that they are not initiating anything, they are reacting. In the meantime, the German economy is being taken apart. American LNG and other firms are making a gigantic profit while the European economies are collapsing. We are going into the largest collapse of industry of the German economy, but then, because of the size and the importance of the German economy for all of Europe, this will lead to a gigantic economic downfall of Europe. So Ritter is asking quite polemically, are these your friends? Are these your allies? And I think, it is an unbelievable situation. Um, he says even some sharper tones, that these officials who are condoning such policies are committing treason against the German people. These are strong words, but if you think what is at stake, and what a incredible propaganda war is being fought, where the NATO countries and the so-called Western democracies are pretending they're the good ones, and Russia and China and all these autocratic regimes are all the evil ones. The reality of that looks quite different, but the population is being conditioned to go along, but they're going along to their own demise. So in one sense, it's better if people are polemically raising these issues before it is too late. But, it is a very, very dangerous situation.
Well, you mentioned von der Leyen. One of her statements was on making Russia and its oligarchs pay to compensate Ukraine. She said, "We have the means to make Russia pay," which sounds a lot like Biden when he promised that the Nord Stream pipeline would not be brought online. Now, at the same time, the European Union issued a call for a special court for war crimes tribunal to prosecute Russian senior officials. I don't think they ever did that for the US policy of Cheney and others to destroy Iraq, Afghanistan, Hillary and others in Libya. This is the height of arrogance coming from the European Commission and von der Leyen, isn't it?
And hypocrisy. It is interesting that an Iraqi court right now has indicted Trump and Pompeo for the assassination of General Soleimani. So at least some reaction of this sort, but you are absolutely right. The blatant hypocrisy and double standard of, accusing Russia and China for everything, but the West is condoning these things and covering it up, and this is definitely something we have to raise.
Now, you had mentioned some of the problems coming out of Germany from the German government. Steinmeier made some comments, the German president. There just seems to be no end to the piling on to make it seem as though Germany is the most loyal member of NATO.
Yeah, Steinmeier is now so concerned about human rights in China and the protests there against the COVID measures. On that, I should just note, that if you calculate how many people died in China, 5,700, and if you extrapolate the number of people living in China, which is more than 3 times or almost 4 times as much as the United States, if China would have had the same death ratio like the United States, they would have had 4.7 million deaths, and compare that to the 5,700. So, it is quite possible that some people are, annoyed by the continued measures China is taking on the zero COVID measures. But these are a couple of thousand people as compared to 1.4 billion people. And, the idea that Steinmeier is so concerned about the freedom of expression, I can only laugh about that, because, the one German court, and I think the Bundestag as well, had made a legislation before, confirmed a change in paragraph 130 of the Criminal Code, Article 5, which went as an attachment to some other legislation, and it means a tremendous sharpening of the law against so-called incitement. Now, according to that, if you cover up any war crimes, or if you say something which could lead to an increase of hatred, but it's such as several legal experts have noted, this is such a rubble paragraph, that it gives room for the courts and for the police. It opens up the floodgate to completely suppress any opinion. So if you take that together with another atrocity, namely a EU guideline to teachers, whereby they are supposed to pre-bunk pupils, that is children, against Russian propaganda. Now, debunking means that if somebody says something bad, you can always debunk it. You say this is not true, and you tell what you think is the truth. But pre-bunking means that you inoculate people in such a way that they don't even get the idea to ask questions. So they have made a whole list of things you are not allowed to say. For example, NATO expansion is hurting the interest of Russia. NATO is aggressive. And there's a whole list of things, or that even there is a prehistory to the war in Ukraine. All of these things are supposed to be forbidden, and pupils, that is children, are supposed to be psychologically vaccinated against any such interpretation. Now, in my view, this is not freedom of expression, Mr. Steinmeier. This is a dictatorship. This is a mind control. And, we are now doing an investigation into the many efforts to completely manipulate the debate. Many people complain about the fact that there is no more discourse. You cannot have different opinions. And I'm afraid this does not mean that we are living in a democracy. It means we are living increasingly in an authoritarian regime.
Well, on this note, the interesting development this last week, Nina Jankowicz, who was run out as the attempted disinformation czar in the United States, has now returned as a registered British agent. So it makes it clear where these narratives are coming from. I'd like to bring up on this question the proliferation of discussion from the Pentagon and leading officials of the threat from China. One of the topics taken up at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting, with Blinken and Stoltenberg joining arms on this, was the need to have global NATO to confront China. You have all sorts of developments around this. And Helga, what do you have on that?
Well, the Pentagon just put out their annual global power report on China, where they characterize China as a pacing threat. And they say that the idea of China, that they want to have a rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049, is a pacing threat, an existential threat to the United States. Now, that shows you how absolutely ideologicalized these people are. I'm familiar with the effort of China, or the programmatic intention to have this rebirth of the Chinese nation. Now, what is wrong with that? China has been in history for millennia, and I emphasize for millennia, the leading scientific and cultural nation in the world. This only stopped basically around the 15th century. And, then they had the century of humiliation, which was the 19th century. And then they had the, struggle, which led to the formation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. and they have now, defined as a goal that they want to have the rejuvenation of China by the 100th birthday of the founding of the People's Republic of China, by reviving the 5,000 years of history, by creating a modern, socialist, culturally advanced, democratic country, which is supposed to create happiness for the people. Now, from everything I know, and I'm in contact with China experts from Western countries, from Germany, from Spain, from Italy, from Denmark, from other places, and people who are China experts. That is not that you are blind against what's happening in China, but that you know something about Chinese history, Chinese economics, Chinese policies, that all the things which are being said about China in terms of that they want to change the world order to create to replace the American empire with the Chinese empire, it's just completely wrong. It does not confirm, it does not go along with what the Chinese history is. And, in a certain sense, it is their absolute sovereign right if they want to revive their tradition of being a great cultural, civilizational nation. And I think that this is just completely crazy, and it's really something people should not fall for. So I really think that the idea of the United States and China being in an adversarial relationship, who can it solve? Not the United States, not the American people, but the British. And the British have put out another report. They have a geostrategic institute, Council of Geostrategy, it's called. They have just put out a report about being concerned about the Himalaya, and that has been a British Empire concern since way back when, because of their manipulation at the point of Indian independence, they split Bangladesh and Pakistan, and they defined certain areas in the Himalaya as, contested areas between India and China for only one purpose: to keep stirring it up for future conflict. And in this report, they defined the Himalaya as the northern front of the Indo-Pacific scenario. This is ridiculous, I mean, the countries of Asia do not want to be pulled into this geopolitical confrontation, having to choose between the United States and China. And it is quite interesting that the Japanese representatives at a recent meeting of the Trilateral Commission, they invited the press for the first time to participate. And then these Japanese participants said, warning from the Trilateral Commission of all places, they warned the US not to force the countries of Asia to choose, because if they would be forced to choose, they would choose China. So the sentiment of Asia is not to be pulled into this confrontation, but they want to cooperate in the BRICS Plus, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Eurasian Economic Union. And all of these countries are moving under the pressure of the sanctions, the exclusion of Russia from the SWIFT agreement. They are now moving to create their own financial system. And the West is pursuing policies which are contrary to the interest of the nations of Europe and the United States. So we should really, not fall into this trap.
I think it's interesting this Council for Geostrategy is essentially putting forward the old arguments from the Great Game, as you mentioned, from the mid-19th century, as part of this pivot to Asia. And we see Admiral Richard, who can't seem to keep his mouth shut on these things, once again surfacing as talking about China as the big one. It's coming up soon. But at the same time, we just had this very interesting vote in Taiwan, where it appears as though the people of Taiwan don't want the United States to force them to choose independence. What's your assessment of this?
This is very interesting because, the DDP, the party of President Tsai, they just lost in the local election, I think from 21 counties or provinces, whatever, they only have 5, and I think the KMT, the Kuomintang, has 17 or 13. So President Tsai resigned as the leader of the DTP. She's still president, but it is very clear this was an overwhelming vote by the Taiwanese people for peace. They don't want this confrontation. And the interesting thing is this was not reported by the Western media at all. If you would not know about it, you wouldn't find this information, maybe as a tiny note in 1 or 2 papers. But at the same time, there were massive reports about the huge demonstrations, of maybe 100 people, maybe a couple of hundred with the white piece of paper. And, it has all the signs like that it was exactly like it happened in 1989 with the Tiananmen Square demonstration, that a lot of these people have been paid by foreign intelligence services. Some of them have confirmed that already. So, you see how the manipulation occurs, but that does not change the fact that China is moving ahead. They just have sent 3 taikonauts to their Chinese space station, where they are for a short period of time together with the 3 ones who were there already. Then the 3 ones who were there before will return, and these 3 new ones will take over the post. Now, this is incredible. That is not reported as a great accomplishment. And what's even bigger, in my view, is the fact that the thermonuclear fusion research facilities in Hefei just announced that they are confident that they will be able to have a continuous plasma fusion process by 2028, and that they will be able to put fusion generated electricity directly into the grid by 2035. Now, that is an accomplishment for all of mankind, because once we have thermonuclear fusion, we have energy security on Earth. And that will mean that one major reason for war and conflict will be gone. But that is not newsworthy to these geopolitical warhawks. But that doesn't mean that China is not moving ahead on that for the benefit. And they just have basically donated a tokamak reactor to Thailand, which they pre-manufactured all the parts in China and then shipping it to Thailand. And that is what is newsworthy, but that is not being reported.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you look at the media trying to find out what's going on, and it's just nothing but a City of London, Wall Street continuing narrative. Now, you brought up this question earlier of mind control and the use of narratives and censorship and threats, open threats. I mean, that's what the Committee to Counter Disinformation of Ukraine is being used for by NATO to silence opposition. Uh, what do you make of the possibility that the situation around NATO unity is in grave danger? There was a former Reagan administration official, Bruce Fein, who came out this last week saying that the United States should leave NATO. Do you see more of that tendency developing?
Well, I think so. Obviously, there are these demonstrations in all of Europe, in Italy, in France, in Belgium, in Germany, where people demand a stop to the weapons to Ukraine. They stop to the sanctions, stop to the inflation of the energy prices. So there is a lot of motion, and there's a big divide between the populations and the governments. That's one thing. Then there is obviously rifts in the transatlantic unity. Politico, for example, has an article where they quote an unnamed EU official basically saying, expressing anger about the fact that the American energy firms become mega rich while Europe is going into a deep depression. Because LNG gas is, being sold to Europe, which is 4 times as expensive as the energy prices were before, or even more. So there are these tensions, and naturally, von der Leyen is on a rampage against Hungary. If they keep doing that, you may have a Hungary exit, Hungexit, or what you would call it. And the EU is, in general, not in such a unity whatsoever. I think there are lone voices which make it into the news, like Oscar Lafontaine has said very sharp statements. He has a new book out where he also demands that Europe should take its own self-interest. And there are some people who recognize that, but I think it's far below what would be necessary, because we are right now with this government. Scholz is one thing; he is a mixed character. But I think Habeck is completely ruining the German economy. If people are freezing to death in the winter, they can thank to Habeck. If we get into a war with Russia, thank Baerbock. I mean, this woman who is supposedly a foreign minister, she has no knowledge. She's the most uninformed, most inadequate foreign minister Germany ever had. She has no knowledge of Russia. She has no knowledge of culture. She's just a NATO tool. And, the sooner people wake up to that, the better.
Well, and then in terms of shaping the opposition, you released this document of the 10 fundamental principles for achieving peace and security. I know last week when we talked about this, we asked people to engage with us in a dialogue, circulate it, become involved in promoting it. We're seeing some motion on that, but how do you see this moving? It seems to be somewhat slow, but starting to move.
Well, I think that many of the participants in the conferences are quite active. That may not show every day because it takes time. We have this call by the Mexican Congressman Robles calling on elected officials all over the world. That is moving. Then the former president of Guyana, Donald Ramota, just wrote a very biting article, which I find actually very useful, because he says the former colonial powers of Europe are now the colonies. And he basically says the same thing like what Scott Ritter says, but he says it from the standpoint of a former president of a developing country. So a lot of things are happening, and I can only say it's important to discuss these principles, because there's also a discussion, are these 10 principles a programmatic statement? No, they are not. They are not a program. There is a difference between a program where you say we want to have certain projects economically or Glass-Steagall or whatever. These are supposed to be principles which define, the orientation of the effort. Like the Peace of Westphalia accomplished the very important principle that if you want to have a peace order, you need to take into account the interest of the other. That's a principle. That's not a program. And the idea to eliminate poverty, to absolutely have sovereignty and a partnership of sovereign countries, these are principles and not a program. So I really can only encourage people to engage in a discussion, because it is the question, in light of the danger of nuclear extinction and a collapsing Western system, an emerging new system coming mainly from the BRICS countries and the global south. Can we give ourselves a political order which allows the long-term survivability of humanity? And that is something everybody should be concerned with, because if you are not concerned with it, the oligarchy for sure is, and you're just leaving them the room to make the rules.
So I think the point is that the discussion goes into the philosophical realm, not the pragmatic realm. And your husband was always insisting that one of the weaknesses of people engaging in politics is they're looking for the short-term pragmatic solutions, when in fact these solutions exist on a higher level.
Yes, this is why we not only have this effort to build a world movement of world citizens in line with Friedrich Schiller, who stated that there is no contradiction between a patriot and a world citizen. And the idea, that people have to start thinking about the one humanity first, to think as a world citizen, is really a very important question, because you will not be able to solve this incredible conflict if you are thinking only in terms of national or regional considerations. And that is why the adjunct campaign, if you want, is very important. Namely, we have started to have our own Schiller choruses in many corners of the world to sing this beautiful canon, Dona nobis pacem, give us peace, which is not only a expression of a desire to have world peace. It's also it appeals to this higher nature of people, of human beings. And we have now choruses singing in France, in Denmark, in Germany, in the United States. And we want to encourage any choir, church choir, other choirs, to join with us and sing this canon as an expression of the wanting to have world peace and to avoid the annihilation of the human species. So go to our website, look at some examples and get inspired, because that is bringing in this higher quality of humanity, which is needed right now.
And also on the Schiller Institute website, while you're there, download Helga's Principles for Peace, the 10 principles that she drafted as part of a follow-up to the meeting on November 22nd. You can also go and watch that video because it's very relevant for this discussion. So get involved in the discussion and send us your thoughts. You can always contact us through the schillerinstitute.com. Helga, anything else?
No, but I think, we're going now into the Advent, the Christmas period, where people get distracted by a lot of running around, shopping. And I am afraid that we are in for a surprise. I mean, there are now reports, both from Colonel McGregor, who said that he sees signs for a coming Russian offensive. Then there are Western reports about satellite pictures that 500,000 troops are amassing, and a lot of activity is indicating that a new Russian offensive may be in the works. Various Ukrainian officials have said that they, want to take back Crimea. British think tanks have said it should happen this year. So I'm not so sure that we will have a peaceful Christmas, but we may go into a period of heightened danger to civilization. And that's why the idea to have an end to this war, to have a negotiated solutions, diplomacy, is more urgent than ever. And obviously, the catalog of new security architecture is really what is required.
So you can join us in building that new security architecture. And again, if you're not a member, become a Schiller Institute member. So Helga, thanks for joining us again this week. And if all things work out, we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.